Plenty of people from all corners of the world choose to come to Canada, but many Canadians also pick up and find a new path in foreign lands. What drives them and how do they come to view their homeland? Let's ask from furthest away in geography to nearest. In Oxford, UK, Jeremy Howick, director of the Oxford Empathy Program in the University of Oxford's Faculty of Philosophy. In Los Angeles, California, Kirstine Stewart, member of the executive committee at the World Economic Forum and head of their Future of Media, Sport, and Entertainment platform. In Atlanta, Georgia, Andrea Bibbs, senior director, diversity and inclusion strategy at Warner Media News and Sports. And here in Toronto, Nadia Theodore, senior vice president, global government and industry affairs at Maple Leaf Foods and a former Canadian diplomat. Hi, welcome to you all from all over around the world where you are. We're very excited to have you on the program.
Hello.
Great to be here.
Hello.
I want to ask all of you the first question, but Jeremy, I'll start with you since you're the furthest away. You've all watched John Stackhouse's interview. What did you think of his analysis of how Canada can better utilize its expat population? Jeremy?
Yeah, I think it's a great idea because there's a lot of untapped potential of Canadians who are quite expert at what they do. All the people you have on the panel here who could contribute to what John calls, I think it's a great idea, an 11th province. And also I think that we become prouder to be Canadian when we go away because Canada's far from perfect. We can improve many things, but when you go away, you realize how much better it is at a lot of good things than many other countries.
I want to pick up on what you just said. When I lived abroad, I actually think I became a better Canadian. Why do you think we become prouder when we live abroad?
Let me give an example. I went home back to Canada a few years ago and I had a barbecue with some friends, just random friends who I grew up with. We were sitting around the table chatting and I realized of six people, there were 3 people born in countries outside Canada, 3 different religions. And it was just seamless and it was fine. It was totally normal. But outside Canada, that kind of thing is not as normal as it should be. So that's why I think we're better at, what John called bridging differences and so on. So I think this 11th province idea would be great and we have a lot to offer.
Kirstine, I want to ask you the first question I asked Jeremy. You saw John Stackhouse's interview. How do you think Canada can better utilize its expat population?
Well, I think, as we've been saying here already this morning, we are connected. We do have a very kind of solid shared set of values, and it's easy for us to sometimes find each other overseas. And I think it's a great idea to tap into that talent base. This is the time of networks. Connected networks are so important, and I think the opportunity to really kind of leverage the power and the strength and the connectivity of ourselves as we are in different places around the world, that's something that's untapped and probably could be better utilized.
And Andrea, you've been in Atlanta for almost 20 years, almost 20 years? I should know this. What did you think of what John Stackhouse said?
I thought it was great. And I think especially around that bridging differences and utilizing us as Canadians who are overseas to help better, Canada at home in many different ways. So I really love that. I feel like, just like what Jeremy was saying, I became an even prouder Canadian when I moved to Atlanta and to the US. So I'm always waving my flag and I feel like I'm an unofficial ambassador here. So just, continuously talking about how great our country is and many opportunities for Americans and others to utilize some of the great things we have at home as well.
And Nadia, you recently moved back to Toronto after living in Atlanta. So I'll ask you the same question. What do you think about his argument to utilize the expat population better?
Yeah, I think that the idea of using Canadians at all levels while they are abroad to better our home country is something that John and the book and this idea of Planet Canada is going to pay off for us exponentially over the next 5, 10, 15 years. And in particular, what kind of drove it home for me was the idea of us not fretting so much about whether we are experiencing brain drain or brain gain, something that we always talk about when we talk about expats and Canadians going and living abroad. Oftentimes there's this fretting about Canadians leaving our country and then leaving the talent and expertise that they have with them. And I think that John's idea and the whole thesis that no, in fact, Canadians that go abroad, it is brain gain for Canada. And if we are intentional about reaching out and connecting, not just to the CEOs and heads of companies and heads of institutions that live abroad, but Canadians of all walks of life, all expertise at all levels of their careers that are abroad, and drawing them into the future of Canada and the Canadian story that we are trying to create in our hometowns, then in fact, what we are doing is building this 11th, this 13th province and territory, I'd like to say, that can really benefit richly to our domestic experience, Canadian experience, but also this idea of our global Canadian experience and the global footprint that we want to leave as Canada.
And just to pick up on what Nadia was saying, Kirstine, when we do think when Canadians leave the country, we think of it maybe as a loss. Should we change how we look at that and look at it more as of a gain, as Nadia was suggesting?
Absolutely. And I think this idea of a cycle, I think, John points that out in the book around the fact that this is not about a brain drain or brain loss. This is a brain cycle. And going out into the world and then coming back to Canada, I know myself, I've done that about 3 or 4 times. I've left the country, gone to find, some great jobs to do internationally. I tend to always come back. And I think, there hopefully is a benefit back to the country when people like myself decide that, they've had a great experience overseas or in another country and, have learned a lot and can bring some of that back to the country, including those networks that we built internationally. Like, I think there is that sense of a brain cycle, which is so powerful.
You said that you always come back. Is that because of family or is it because Canada is home?
Canada is home. And yeah, I do have family here, but I also have family globally. And I think for so many of us, I think the wonderful thing about Canada is we are a nation of largely immigrants. And so whether it's ourselves or our parents who have come to Canada, there is this sense of a constant looking to globally. Like, I think we're global citizens, and there is this kind of home. There's a homebodiness about what we experience as well, and I think sometimes we miss home when we're away from it. And as much as we can be proud of being, in this world and being global, there is something about coming home too. And I've always done it. I'll be curious to see if I do it again this time.
And Andrea, I saw you nodding your head.
Yeah, definitely, because so many of us are children of different cultures, as John said in his book as well. My parents they moved to Canada from the UK and both have Guyanese roots, and I'm first generation Canadian. So I grew up with a lot of other first generation Canadians. And I think growing up, I probably felt a little bit more Guyanese than Canadian. And when I moved to the States, I think it was even more important for me to know, to really shout that I'm Canadian. And especially having small children, making sure that they know that they're as Canadian as they are American as well. So, I think being a first generation Canadian also gives us the opportunity or gives us this different, I'd say we're maybe a little bit more empathetic to different cultures as well. And I think that helps us when we're in the US and other places overseas.
And Jeremy, was there anything in particular that John said that you strongly related to?
Yeah, well, I think that he had a great idea to mention the C100, these tech geniuses in the Silicon Valley who have banded together. They're all Canadian, and they help Canadians in the Silicon Valley, and they go back to Canada and help. There could be there's all this goodwill. People go away, they're away, they feel more Canadian, they want to help. We could have a kind of M100 for people in media and sports like Kirstine and Andrea. an F100 for people in food, and an H100 for people in health. I mean, here at Oxford alone, Professor Sir John Bell is leading the charge to get a vaccine for the coronavirus, and he's way higher than I am, but I'm also not bad at what I do. So there's all this opportunity and this goodwill. So being intentional about it, as Nadia said, it should be a pretty easy task that could pay huge dividends.
Nadia, I mentioned that you just came back to Toronto, and it was really nice to see the homecoming that you had on social media. A lot of people were very excited that you're back in the city, and you're working for Maple Leaf Foods. But you were Consul General for Canada in Atlanta. Is it much of what John is talking about the actual job of Canada's diplomatic community?
Absolutely. And, more and more, it is our job to connect Canada around the world. More and more, we are seeing that our diplomats, our diplomatic community, our foreign service can really help shape the future of Canada by encouraging Canadians, the diaspora around the globe, wherever we as diplomats are placed, to be drawn in, as John says, not just on Canada Day, not just for the celebrations, but for the deep policy discussions that we are having about Canada domestically and Canada as our place in the world and where our place in the world is. And I think that we are, over the past 5 to 10 years, I would say, the diplomatic community has really tried to focus in on making those connections, building those communities, building those relationships abroad with Canadians, again, at all rank, in all different sectors, to really get a cross-functional view of what our Canadians abroad see as the future of Canada and what their contribution can be while they are living abroad, and then eventually when they come back home.
And when you were in Atlanta as Consul General, what was your role?
So as Consul General and as a Consul General, as an ambassador, or as a High Commissioner, our senior diplomats abroad are really the voice and the face of Canada around the globe. And so, our number one job, in fact, is to protect Canadians who are traveling in our regions of accreditation. That's number one. And we saw that ever so clearly and transparently during COVID-19 and the repatriation of so many Canadians from around the globe. And then second, of course, is our duty and our joy to help Canadian businesses who are looking for opportunities to sell their stuff, whether it's goods or services and everything in between around the world. And so we have teams around the world. They're called trade commissioners. Find one, use one if you are a Canadian company looking to sell abroad and go global. And then thirdly, and a bit about what we're talking about here today, we are here to sell the brand of Canada abroad, to really be the voice of Canada's foreign policy, the voice of Canada's pulse abroad, to tell people about what Canada stands for, what our values are, what our intentions are, and to build those alliances with other countries and other communities around the world.
So Kirstine, when we hear brand Canada, do you think that the engagement of Canadians abroad should largely be a job for diplomats, or does the private sector have a role that they can play?
Oh, I think the private sector has a great role. And I think, as already was pointed out, C100, there's a lot of communities that are already self-forming on the private side, if you want to call it that. And I think business leaders who get together, and I think, Nadia makes a great point too. It's not just about leaders of business, but people who lead within businesses. So it's not always necessarily the top CEOs or presidents of companies, but those that take leadership positions on their own to kind of force their way through. There's entrepreneurs, there's a huge network of Canadians that do find each other. And I think as much as we have the benefit of the diplomatic service in extending those opportunities to reach out and kind of talk about the greatness of Canada, I think it's also a great opportunity to tap into those that are on the private side and working business day to day, to also be advocates and support the idea of brand Canada, not just the ability of Canadians within Canada, but those that are global to connect and really, bring forward some fantastic, the wonderfulness of Canada.
Well, in the book, John said he had lots of examples for the argument that one of the reasons that people like Canadians around the world is because we're kind of like the U.S., but not really. So, Jeremy, when you are living abroad, do you think that your country, do you think Canada celebrates your achievements the way they might if you were an American?
I think the good thing about Canada is that we don't kind of brag about ourselves as much as some other countries like our neighbors down south. And can I just add one thing to what Nadia said? I agree that it's not just about Canada Day, but London's best party in Trafalgar Square used to be the Canada Day parade, and for some reason they stopped doing it. And if they could reinstate that, that would be wonderful,
I
because it was a
agree.
great place.
I went when I lived in the UK. Yes.
Send back.
So yeah, and then what we've been good at, and I was happy that John mentioned it, the idea of soft power. We don't. At the end of the day, we're a small country, but because we're better, not perfect, but better at this, making bridges, understanding differences, empathy, and so on, that gives us power to connect people. And in this increasingly interconnected world, there's a great role to play, and the fact that there are so many successful Canadians out there proves that. So tapping into that power would be a great idea. So yes, I enjoy. You're proud to be Canadian because people are right away positively inclined towards you the minute you say that you're Canadian. So it's a great advantage being a Canadian outside Canada.
I wanted to ask all of you, how did you end up living where you are living? Jeremy, I'll start with you.
Yeah, well, the best supervisor for my PhD topic was at the London School of Economics. So I went there, and then I got a job at Oxford, which was kind of for me, a dream job. And then I was thinking about coming back to Canada, but a few years ago met the woman who's my wife now. We have 2 kids, and her parents live here, and she doesn't want to move back to Canada.
That's great.
So,
My husband's from the UK. I made him move back to Canada. Well, after 5 years there.
You have better negotiating skills than I do.
And Kirstine, how did you end up in LA?
So I'm in LA. My husband's actually consul general here in Los Angeles, Arizona, and Nevada, and I with the World Economic Forum. So I was working in Geneva for the last year, had moved to the New York office, and then when suddenly everything started shutting down, instead of commuting back and forth from New York to LA to see my husband, we decided I'd be working from here, working from home out of LA. But this is as I said before, this is I think my 3rd stint now in the States. When I was with Twitter, I was running the North American media business out of New York. I was with Hallmark running the international channels out of Denver. So I've had a few experiences in the States, and it's ultimately, we talked about why. Sometimes it doesn't matter scale. Like, as much as we love and enjoy, and we can nurture ourselves and really learn and grow within Canada, sometimes you do have to extend outside those borders in order to really kind of live the full experience of your possible career. And I think that's why a lot of folks do end up going. And again, that's not necessarily brain drain. That's part of a cycle. Hopefully you come back again. But this is now my 3rd time in the States.
Does it feel kind of weird or strange in this COVID time? I know you said you had family here, you have family there as well, but not being able to know when you will be able to see your family in Canada.
It's really tough. I've got my girls who are more grown now. One's out of university. The other one just graduated actually into this kind of bad mess right now. My parents are there, but most of my family's back in the UK as well. And, I think we've been used to living a connected life. I think challenges like this, COVID times, make it really, really tough. I feel a bit better, to be honest with you, knowing that they're back in Canada. I feel like they're a bit safer where they are than if they were with me necessarily. So, and I know that the challenge of COVID is everywhere, and the cases are rising globally, which is very scary for everybody involved. But I think there is a sense of comfort in knowing that with the Canadian healthcare system, they're sitting in Canada and probably are pretty safe compared to where they could be elsewhere.
It's been great being able to continue doing this show, but sometimes the tech is not with us. And so we've lost Andrea Bibbs. We're trying to reconnect with her. But in the meantime, we'll continue our conversation. Nadia, how did you end up living abroad?
Well, so I went abroad for my job. My previous career life, was all about representing Canada in different places around the globe. And to Kirsten's point about cycles, my decision to, in this time, come back to Canada and move to Toronto. I'm born and raised in Ottawa, but to move to Toronto and to take up an executive role with Maple Leaf Foods was really about exactly what we're talking about. This idea of expats, Canadians who have lived the majority or a vast majority of their life abroad, seeing what the opportunity is to give back to their country, taking what they have learned, and then coming home to make that contribution. And who knows, maybe, one day continuing that cycle, as Kirsten said, and going back out. But for me, it was the opportunity to work for such an iconic Canadian brand with such strong values that aligned with my own, seeing what I had seen living abroad and having the opportunity now to give back to Canada from home was something that I just couldn't pass up.
Was it bittersweet for you to come back? Because you had a community in Atlanta, you had friends, you had people, your friends. Was it bittersweet to come back?
Absolutely. It was bittersweet to come back. It was bittersweet to leave government and join the private sector, all of those things. I think it's a little bit about what we're talking about when we talk about Planet Canada and this cycle of people coming in and out. It is absolutely bittersweet to leave your country for another opportunity. But of course, then when the decision is made to then come back home, it's also bittersweet to leave the life that you have created abroad. But I really like this idea of calling it a cycle. I think that that is true with so many things in life, and for sure it's true with regards to careers. And bittersweet to leave, but it sure does feel good to be home.
Well, welcome back. Jeremy, I lived in the UK for 5 years, as I mentioned, and a lot of people would mistake me for being American. And I don't know why I would get offended. I would say, no, I am Canadian. Have you gone through that, and do you correct people?
Yes, well, the fact is that, the United States is more belligerent internationally than Canada is. So in many countries, it's dangerous to be an American. So we're quite happy to be identified as Canadians. And when I've traveled around the world, a lot of Americans put Canadian flags on their backpacks. And just listening to all these wonderful stories, I also went away twice. I went to the university, my undergraduate degree in the States. And in a way, it's not a brain drain, it's a brain gain, because we go away, we expand our own horizons as Canadians. And we therefore have maybe even more to give back when we've been away and when we are away. So yes, but overall, I'm proud to be Canadian. I do correct people, but I don't get angry like some Canadians do, because the fact is that our accents to the outsiders are difficult to distinguish.
Well, how would you define the difference between Americans and Canadians? Not to put you on the spot.
Americans are just like Canadians, but a bit more. So our culture is, to a large degree, not in every sense, but shared in many ways. The backgrounds are shared. Both countries are multicultural, but the U.S. has a more violent background, has a more violent culture. They're more likely to use guns, more likely to be a bit less knowledgeable about the rest of the world. They're more likely to be a bit less able to make bridges. And of course, I'm not generalizing for any American friends watching that they're bad people. It's just the fact is that there are differences, and anyone who's been to both countries notices it. And I think we're just a bit more tempered in many important and good ways.
And Kirsten, given that you're living in the U.S., does that bother you when you're mistaken for being an American?
No. And in the end, they kind of say, well, yeah, now I kind of hear it in your accent. And they do kind of place me as Canadian after I reveal myself. And gosh, I'm constantly wearing Raptors t-shirts and I pretty much identify myself as a We the North kind of person all the time. So I think I make it pretty clear. But, going to what Jeremy said around, the difference in how we kind of act and behave. And I think, it's just our general experience. We talk a lot about leaving Canada because of the necessity to grow a career with scale, and perhaps coming to the States is a part of that. But it also, what we've learned in Canada and the way that we kind of grow ourselves in our jobs and our roles is, as because of our lack of scale, maybe is we become generalists. Like, we in the States, I find they like to hire Canadians because we have a broader view, not just of the world, because culturally we do tend to travel more, and everything else that Jeremy was talking about, but also just in our roles in our careers. We've developed a certain kind of expertise that can make us more kind of flexible in multiple roles. And so at times like these, especially when they're looking for, how are we going to get ourselves out of this post-COVID recession, and what does that look like, and how are we going to rebuild things, having generalists like ourselves who have been really responsible and have to be quite flexible in our jobs, because there's no such thing as, we don't have the scale to support someone doing something so specific, that our ability to work across departments, to work across industries, I think that's something that is a real value. And I find that when I get hired as a Canadian in the States, it's always pointed to the fact that you can do more than one job. And I think that's a great skill to have.
And Nadia, because I think people, when we do talk about the opportunities, Canada has its challenges, we know that. But I think people would be surprised to know that, especially this past summer, we were talking about racial injustice, the Black Lives Matter movement. I know a lot of my friends who are Black, people of color, who have chosen to go to the United States because there are more opportunities there for them. Would that surprise people, Nadia, do you think?
I think that it might surprise Americans, frankly, when they hear that Canadians have left Canada to go to the United States because there is a lack of opportunity in Canada. I think that many Americans see the differences between Canada and the United States, much like how Jeremy described it. And so they would often say to me, wow, you live in the best country in the world, or at least the second best country in the world after their own, because they are very patriotic. And they would be surprised to hear that in many sectors, and especially when we're talking about corporate Canada, much of the time gaining opportunities, as we've talked about, to really scale your career is quite difficult in Canada. And that's, by virtue of the size of our economy, but also by virtue of, the cultural norms that is Canada, which of course, in some instances are positives, not being too much, not being too extra, not wanting too much, not wanting to be too boastful. All of those things are positives in many instances. But when you're looking to grow a career and get those endorsements and those opportunities, oftentimes you want people who are going to be boastful about you, who are going to push you to want more and do more and gain more. And so that requires you oftentimes to go abroad. And I think that many Americans would be surprised that is the truth that many Canadians feel when they stay in Canada.
One of the arguments that John makes in the book is that, while we do have a lot of international students coming to Canada to study here, one of the arguments that he makes is that Canadian students should also leave Canada, travel abroad. And I understand there is a certain amount of privilege to be able to do that. Not everybody has access to funds or even a different passport to go and travel. Jeremy, since you are in the UK and an academic, what do you think Canadian students would get by studying abroad?
The main thing you get is that you realize how great Canada is, because you get to contrast it with where you are. So here in the UK, it's a fantastic place, but they have the vestiges of and a real class system. And of course, we have that in Canada too. But the fact is that many people here in the UK who are part of the so-called upper class are unable to communicate with and relate to those they consider to be part of the lower class. And that creates problems. It creates problems dealing with COVID, when you have the people in the government behaving in certain ways that the average Canadian politician just wouldn't do. So the benefit of going away is you realize what it is to be Canadian more so than you do, paradoxically, if you remain in Canada. There's so many things we take for granted. Like, I mean, you have the Brexit here was kind of almost half with a 1% difference. People kind of still, it's paralyzing the country. Whereas I'm from Montreal, we had a referendum there. It was the same thing, 1% difference. But the next day almost, the vast majority of people just get on with it and accept the result. And whereas in the US, who knows what's going to happen if it's a 1% difference in this coming election.
And Kirstine, we can't have this conversation and not talk about what's happening in the U.S. The election is days away. What's it been like for you as a Canadian to watch an election of this magnitude unfold during a global pandemic as a Canadian living in the United States?
It's a fascinating time. I think we're here while history is being made, in whatever way it gets made over the next week. And, we're seeing conversations that had never been had before. We're seeing groups that had felt that they were disenfranchised and were, for many reasons, didn't have the microphone, now have the microphone in a really powerful way. So it's just been, as an observer, as someone who can't actually vote in this election, but who obviously has a lot of opinions because, I live and work here. It's been an interesting time, and I think we are really here at a time when history is going to be made, and to see how this all unfolds is going to be a fascinating next week ahead.
And Nadia, I have to bring up your old job again. When you were Consul General, you were responsible for some very Republican regions in the U.S. What was it like to work within a diplomatic context with Republicans?
I get asked that question all of the time, and I feel like my answer is not what people are expecting. But I have to say that, and maybe this is by virtue of my training and by virtue of my personality, but it was good. I found it to be one of the most absolutely difficult, but most rewarding and challenging parts of my job, and challenging in a good way, because for me, one of my core values is talking to people who you may or may not agree with, right? And connecting with people whose worldviews might be different than yours. Because to me, it's only through doing that I can then identify. Again, I always said to people, and I'm stealing actually a line from Deputy Prime Minister Freeland. She always used to say, I get paid by Canadian taxpayers in Canadian dollars. So my job is to think about Canada, right? So it's only through talking to people who on the face of it have different views than I do that I can really start to unpack, okay, what is it that relates to what I am trying to bring back to Canada in this situation? What is this person teaching me about where Canada can see itself? We always say, when the U.S. sneezes, Canada catches a cold. Mm-hmm. And so the upheaval that people are seeing in America today, and this tension and this point in time in history, I really do believe that Canadians, especially Canadians that are living abroad, need to be watching and listening and learning, and then bringing those learnings back home for us to learn and to do better here at home, to ensure that what we have built as a country is kept intact and ameliorated to the extent possible. And to me, my time in the Southeast USA taught me that in spades. And I learned so much from every member of Congress and politician and business person that I engaged in, no matter what the stripe.
Well, I think we can only finish off on that, Nadia. Thank you so much. And thank you to Kirstine and to Jeremy. And unfortunately, we weren't able to reconnect with Andrea. Andrea, we do appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.